I think now it's a lot better. Yes, we are probably broadcasting a little bit better now. So listeners, we're coming to the end of our program today, and we are thrilled to be joined on the line with Yameena Ansari. Is a leading Canadian immigrant lawyer in Toronto, Calgary, and in other places in Canada. You can easily reach them. They've dedicated their career to helping individuals and families navigate the complexities of immigrating to Canada. They specialize in permanent residency, express entry, and provincial nomination programs, among other things. And the reason that we connected, Yameena, was because of the work that you have been doing with the visas that Canadian Gazans have been trying to get for their families. And I wanted to talk with you a little bit about your experiences around that. And welcome to the program. Thank you for taking this time out.
Thanks so much for having me on and for continuing to cover this important issue.
Well, the pleasure is ours, because it's because you guys have been doing this kind of work that we get a chance to invite you on and discuss this. First of all, really, thank you. It must be exhausting for you. You've been at this for quite a number of months, if not years. Can you just tell us a little bit about who you are and a little bit about your context, so listeners have some ideas around where you're coming from?
Yeah, so I grew up in Pakistan, and a lot of people, similar to a lot of people that grew up in the Muslim diaspora, I did grow up around a lot of empathy for the Palestinian people. And then after my family and I immigrated to Canada, my parents were quite embedded within the Muslim community. They were actually board members of the local mosque. And through that experience, I also got to know quite a few Palestinian refugees. So kind of learning about the issue from a first-hand perspective. And then, of course, I started my own law firm a few years ago. And through that experience, actually just got pulled into this whole dynamic. So we had somebody who contacted our law firm, just a normal kind of outreach, hey, can you help us come to Canada? And then they said, every other lawyer has refused to help us. And they had shown the entire email chain. They had shown, and I'm not going to name them, but the top refugee lawyers in Canada saying, no, we can't help you. The top immigration lawyers in Canada saying, no, we can't help you. And I didn't know how we were going to help this person who was in Gaza. I just knew that they had knocked on too many doors, and we needed to figure this out. So we said, you know what, we don't know what the path here is, but we cannot be another door that you knock on that doesn't open. So we took them on, and we started working with them, and we started pitching all of these really far out ideas. This is before the Gaza TRV program was ever established. This is when the conflict first started in October. So we started pitching all of these ideas, and then we started realizing just how impossible the situation was, because essentially you have a population that desperately needs to get out, but they can't. The refugee pathways are too long. The overseas refugee pathways are too long. Any of the economic programs, they can't qualify for them, because for all economic programs, you need all these documents. They're not going to be able to acquire those. And the temporary pathways, they wouldn't be able to use those either to come into Canada.
Why?
Because for every single temporary pathway, you need to demonstrate intent to leave. You need to demonstrate that you have a temporary purpose of stay. How is somebody who's coming from Gaza, from an active conflict zone, going to be able to demonstrate temporary intent to stay? We don't even know if their house is going to be there for them to come back to. So we knew there was a problem, because we had a client in front of us. So we kind of just started advocating generally. It was a really loose conglomeration of lawyers. It was essentially just people shouting out of the listserv. We immigration lawyers have these listservs, kind of like discords, I guess, where we try to help each other with tough files. Just saying, okay, well, I've got this Gaza client, you've got this Gaza client. What are you doing? This is what I'm doing. And through that, some of us came together, and we created this group called Gaza Family Reunification Project, and there were a few different arms in that group. But one of the things we did is we advocated for the Gaza TRV program, and we were really happy when it came to be. And since then, the program has really struggled to accomplish what it was set out to do. It was intended to be a pathway for Gazans to come to Canada quickly. And it has really failed to do that. So we just keep talking about it and hoping something will get better.
So just for context, so this was around November 2023 when you started to formulate this with your colleagues, the Gaza Family Reunification Project?
Exactly.
Okay. And by then, Ukraine was already going on. And I believe Canada might have already been accepting folks from there. So there was nothing put into place by the Canadian government around that then. It was just a complete, zero?
It was just a black hole, and that was what we kept saying. We kept asking, what is the difference between the Ukrainians and the Gazans? And, I always just left that question hanging in the air because I think it's a question that nobody really wants to answer or knows how to answer in a polite society like Canada. But why is it that one group of people, namely the Ukrainians, hundreds of thousands of them have been accepted to Canada, all security requirements have been waived, identity requirements have been waived, whereas another group of people, namely the Palestinians, very few of them have actually reached Canada. The ones that have reached here have come here on their own. They've been subjected to intense security screening. So it's, it boggles the mind.
Yeah, what would government officials be telling you when you brought that up?
So the repeated answer to why is there such a limit to the number of Palestinians being accepted, and also why are there such stringent security requirements placed on them, was that there was a concern that there was security concern. So essentially, reading between the lines, they were worried that Hamas would be leaving Gaza through this, and I do, of course, I understand the concern. The entire area is controlled by a government that is considered to be a terrorist group by most nations. So I understand the concern, but we're also talking about a population that's over 50% women and children. So I'm not saying. It's just very unlikely that women and children are members of Hamas.
No, absolutely, no doubt. And I read also that there was pressure from the U.S. and from Israel itself to limit the numbers that Canada would take in. Any comments around that?
That is my understanding as well. Obviously, the U.S. has been a long-term ally of Israel, and my understanding is that there was, some kerfuffle between Canada and Israel, but at the end of the day, there was only so much pushing that Canada was willing to do on this issue, and that was one of the things that we were always harassing Canada about, essentially, is you have more power than you think you do. Can you please press this issue a bit further with Israel?
And did you get any sense whether or not the secondary security that, okay, maybe we can just backtrack. So can we talk about the processes that, is there a difference between, say, a Canadian citizen who was in Gaza that is needing to come out, a permanent resident of Canada who was in Gaza, and then family members? What kinds of differences and distinctions did you see being played out when this was happening?
Yeah, so if you're a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident, you don't need an authorization to return to Canada. You present your passport or your PR card, and you use that to get on a plane.
Right, but typically, sorry, I just want to back up. So then a person would go to the border and then present themselves there. would they just be given easy access, or would they have to go through another security check from the Israeli point of view?
For the Canadian citizen or
Yeah.
the permanent resident?
Yeah.
I don't actually know.
Okay.
I do know that...
I'm just splitting hairs, Yameena. I was just curious, that's all.
Yeah, I don't know because I didn't assist any Canadian citizen or permanent residents in leaving Gaza. I only assisted Gazans. But if you know, I'd be curious to find out.
Maybe something we can follow up later on. But let's talk about then the family reunification. So those Canadian citizens who are applying for visas for their families who are in Gaza to come to Canada, what kind of processes did they have to go through?
So the Gaza TRV program specifically was a bit of a mess because it was a multi-tier process where people would put forward essentially an expression of interest. So the Canadian citizen would say, I want to bring X number of family members over. And then they would wait for a code. And then they would use the code to fill in the entire application. So this just confused the heck out of people because they didn't understand that, okay, I filled out the initial application. Does that mean I'm in?
Yeah.
And then there were certain people who were receiving codes, and then there were other people who were not receiving codes, and people had code anxiety.
Yeah.
Because initially there was a lot of confusion about how many spots were in the program. And the initial number announced was really small. It was a few hundred. So there was all this anxiety and confusion about the program. And then once you put in the actual application, the questions that were asked were really intrusive. So people were asked about all of their social media handles. They were asked about all of the scars that they had. They were asked about all of their family members. So when you ask these kind of intrusive questions, people were really concerned because it sounds like they're screening people to be terrorists. And who is going to be going through all of this? Who are the officers, the Immigration Refugee Citizenship Canada officers, who are going to be going through this information? Because as we know, processes themselves are not objective or unbiased. Processes are made up of the people who carry out those processes. And studies have been done to show that there is a racist lens among the IRCC system. So you have this population who is putting forward all of their social media history, and somebody who doesn't have any cultural context and who may be biased against Arabs or Muslims is reviewing all of this. Right? And then the other thing that became problematic about the process is that at the end of the day, all of the applicants who were Canada would submit to leave Gaza had to be approved by Israel. So now Israel has access to who is this person who's trying to leave, who are all their family members, what's their social media, where do they live, and it was a massive. It was really scary for the people who were trying to leave because on the one hand they had to disclose all this information, and on the other hand they were like, it's going to get into the hands of somebody who could harm us.
Yeah, it's a total catch-22. And just to be clear, I mean, the others that were given access into Canada, like Ukrainians, or if they've coming from a different country in similar circumstances, they don't have to go through this kind of process, as far as you know.
No, they don't. And what Canada said that because there's no biometric centers in Gaza. So biometrics is when the Canadian government will take fingerprints and photos of people who want to come to Canada, and they will cross-reference that across various national, international databases to figure out if that person is a security threat. So the argument was that there's no biometric centers in Gaza, so these security checks can't happen, and this is why we need all this information. But I don't think that they were stopping to do the biometrics for the Ukrainians either. And anyways, once the Gazans would leave, generally they go to Cairo and they finish their biometrics over there.
Exactly. Yeah.
So anyways, the Gazans would do biometrics before they came to Canada.
Absolutely. No, totally, absolutely. It is crazy, and you were also a contributing author to a report that that came out about this indifference. I'm just trying to look up the title of the report, but intended to fail, that discussed the processes that the Canadian government decided to take, and apart from that, one of the conclusions that you've reached is that the process became politicized and unnecessary. Talk to us about that being I guess, put into place, other than looking at it from a humanitarian issue.
This is. I feel like the Gaza moment has become a really interesting moment in modern society, and I'm curious to hear your experience with it as well. I find that nothing makes a room cold like talking about this issue. People are getting fired over this.
Yes.
People are getting canceled over this. People are getting doxxed over this. My law firm will receive death threats. My employees and staff will receive death threats over this. And it's really fascinating because there's other political issues that we talk about that don't seem to evoke the same emotions in people. And I think it's because when people think about the issue, they're not just thinking about, okay, there's women and children who are trapped in this tiny zone and they can't leave, and they're running out of water, and there's disease, and there's no infrastructure, and they're being bombed. I don't think that's what people hear. I think what they hear is Zionism or pro-Palestine. They hear Jews versus Muslims. They hear, like, I think that's where their mentality kind of goes. And I don't know, maybe I'm an idealist. I've never thought about it in that way. I've always thought about it in a way of there's a bunch of hostages that are scared, that are away from their families. That is a crisis, and we need to help those folks. And also, there's women and children who've had their men killed, who are trapped under rubble, and we also need to help them. So for me, it was always a human issue. And as a person, it pains me that we're so divided on something that's so simple and clear.
Yeah, it's really interesting how people come to their conclusions based on their experiences, and people see what they want to see, unfortunately. I mean, not all immigrants who are lawyers in this country, and I'm sure that the list that you talked about earlier contained a lot of immigrants who happen to be immigration lawyers in Canada that probably also turned this down. It takes a person of integrity to be able to deal with the situation and look at it and then decide that they're going to do something because it's right, instead of towing the line, as it were. We've had this entire program talking around this issue as well, in terms of Canadian society and where it has normalized itself. And yeah, Palestine is an issue that we're seeing globally that is really bringing this to the fore. I think people are waking up and deciding which side they want to be on. It's unfortunate that we are up against the systemic issues that we are. I mean, in our notes around preparing for this conversation, we touched upon politics and the election and if things like that make any difference. But we've seen it, haven't we? Over the last number of years, Canada has always been on the side of Israel, and unwavering so. Where are we now? I mean, what feelings do you have at this point when you recognize that Canada is not going to turn around and be supportive on this issue? It seems like the entire community has been agitating and banging its head against the wall, and yet these numbers are not getting any larger, and the processes are not easing up.
My heart really goes out to the Palestinian community. I think I really have so much admiration for the protesters, for everybody who is on the front lines, who keeps advocating, who keeps putting their heart out there. And honestly, if I don't know where they find the strength, maybe it's desperation, maybe they don't know what else to do. For me personally, of course, I will always keep, talking about these issues. And I'm also a hopeless optimistic, and I hope things will change. But realistically, I think it's very unlikely that Canada is going to turn this around in a big way. I think that there is a certain stance that we have to take internationally, and I think we do put ourselves forward as a humanitarian nation, regardless of whether or not that actually matches up with what we do. That is the image that we create globally, and due to that image, Canada did feel compelled to create a program. They do feel compelled to bring in a certain number of Gazans if they themselves reach our shores. But I think also it's very limited what Canada is going to do, because as you've mentioned, this issue is so divisive, right? So I think if Canada was to go and do something in a big way, I think it could potentially alienate a significant amount of the electorate.
I hear you, yeah. No, I didn't. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. No, I hear you that there's a lot at risk for Canada to do it, and yet there's such opportunity for it to, especially given the state of affairs now with the pressure on the United States coming up here, for Canadians to figure out what is their identity and where they stand. The issue is really complex, isn't it, for Canadians, those that are normalized Canadians, I would say, those that believe in the Canadian nation and what it stands for and so on, don't also see that what we are doing here in Canada is just a slight difference of what's happening in Israel-Palestine. I mean, both are occupied, after all. Both indigenous communities are not being treated well, and so on and so forth. I'm not comparing it and saying that it's equal. Nonetheless, there are similarities. So for Canada to take a stand on Israel from a state's perspective becomes really, really difficult, I think. And I think that's the role of civil society, to keep at it.
Yeah, I think that could be challenging for Canada to say that these are occupied lands, that Israel is imposing settler colonialism onto the Gazans, because really Canada, I mean, as much rhetoric as Canada has had around reconciling our own bloody history with colonialism, what we've actually done has been really minimal. And I think this is an apt analogy in terms of that Canada does a lot of hand waving and ceremonial gestures around reconciliation, but actual actions in terms of closing the gap in funding, closing the gap in access to clean water, closing the gap in economic mobility, those numbers just are not at the same level as all the hand waving.
Yeah, it's been a real moment for I think all Canadians to really see the disparities in how Palestinians are treated, how Indigenous folks are treated, and it's still the same Canada. Yameena, what would you like to say in terms of the last words around this topic? I wanted to thank you just because I know that folks like you do a lot of work for the benefit of everybody else, not just yourself, but your colleagues. It must be really, really tiring for you to continue doing this kind of work. What would you like to leave listeners with in terms of maybe what they can do to help out in whichever ways? How have you been seeing people helping out in different ways?
So there's a few different ways that people can help me and my clients specifically. One of the ways that people can help my clients is if there's people listening who own small businesses and who want to help skilled Gazans. If you reach out to me and my law firm, we can connect you with Gazans who want to come to Canada and who need a job. And through this, you can, first of all, have somebody who is so happy that will never leave their job. And also, you can actually help somebody come to Canada. This is something that always shocks me because this is a program that we use through which we bring quite a few Gazans over. And all they need is a job. And I always think it's going to be so easy to help them. And it never is. And that always surprises me that nobody's willing to give these people a job. Another way that you can help them is obviously financially. So it's not cheap to, to pay a bribe to leave Gaza and to come to Cairo and then take a plane from Cairo to Canada. There's a lot of money that is involved, and there's ways to, either to donate directly or to, for example, align yourself with a sponsorship agreement holder. So these are organizations that sponsor Gazans. And again, we would, if people contact us, we'd be happy to direct them. But I would say, of course, it's important to post on social media. Of course, it's important to keep protesting. But in my work specifically, and in the work I do, and I bring Gazans over, the number one thing that these people need is access to a job and money.
I mean, that's fantastic, and it's the least that people who care can do, and it's really easy too. It's just ansarilaw.ca, ANSARILAW.ca. We've been speaking with Yameena Ansari. Thank you so much for taking this time out and for informing us and also letting us, giving us some ways of giving back. I think that's a fantastic opportunity for businesses who are looking for talent, because Gazans are very, very well educated. I was surprised when I saw the statistics. All fields. So it's fantastic opportunity.
Thank you so much. Thanks for keeping this issue alive.
It's our pleasure. Thank you. Take care. And that's about it. We're coming to the end of our program, and we will be connecting with you again next week. And in the meantime, there will be other programming following us, no doubt, in about a minute or two.